Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're always diving into these fascinating corners of the English language, and today, well, it's a word that's just everywhere, right? Literally. But I mean, have you ever really thought about
This is one
literally?
of those words you use without thinking.
Exactly. So we're taking a deep dive into it, all thanks to this blog post by Dennis Barron. It's called, get this, literally has always been figurative.
Oh, wow. He's going right for it.
Right. I mean, just the title alone, that's a bold statement, don't you think? Like, right off the bat, Barron is saying that literally often actually means, well, figuratively, it's opposite.
It reminds me of how language can be so slippery. Meanings change, words get flipped around.
Totally. And the thing is, he argues this isn't new. He says this whole literally meaning figuratively thing, it's been going on for centuries.
Huh. I wouldn't have guessed that. You always think of these language debates as being very modern.
Right. But to really get into it, Barron starts talking about how in English, we have all these word pairs that have opposite meanings, but we kind of use them interchangeably. Like, for example, I could care less versus I couldn't care less.
Oh, yeah. They should mean completely different things, but people say them both, meaning like they don't care at all.
Exactly. It makes you wonder about how meaning works sometimes. But okay, let's get back to literally. So Barron takes us all the way back to its root, to the Latin litera, which means alphabetic letter.
So it all starts with actual letters, pretty straightforward.
You'd think so, right? But here's the thing. Even way back then, it seems literally was already being used figuratively. Can you believe that?
Okay. From the very beginning.
That's what he says. It's like this word that's supposed to be about being literal was already being used in this more, I don't know, flexible way.
It's funny how that happens, isn't it? Like the meaning expands beyond its original literal sense.
Totally. But how does that happen? I mean, how does a word that literally means letter become this whole other thing?
Well, think about it. Even letters themselves, they represent something bigger, right? Knowledge, ideas, stories. We talk about literacy, literature.
Huh.
It's all connected to this deeper understanding, not just the physical letters.
So it's like literally, even from the beginning, was about getting at the true meaning of something, even if that meant going beyond the surface level, being a bit more metaphorical.
Precisely. And this is really important. This whole thing with literally shows us something crucial about language. It's not static, it's not fixed. It changes and adapts all the time. New meanings pop up, often in this metaphorical way, and over time they just become part of how we use the word.
Like language is alive, kind of.
Exactly. It's constantly evolving, just like we are. Think about the word oversight, for example.
Oh, good one. It can mean both to supervise something and to miss something completely. How does that even happen?
Well, you see, those two meanings, they came about because somewhere along the line, the idea of supervising, it started to include this idea that you could also miss something. Like, if you're overseeing something, well, there's always a chance you might overlook something, right?
So it's like language is reflecting how we actually think about things, those little gray areas.
Yeah.
I like that.
Exactly. And literally is a perfect example of this back and forth between what's literal and what's figurative. The word just seems to thrive on that tension.
It really does. And speaking of tension, Barron talks about how this whole thing, it can lead to some pretty funny misunderstandings. People using literally figuratively and someone else taking it, well, literally.
Right, because language isn't just about the words themselves, it's about shared understanding. What's obvious to one person might not be to another. That's where context comes in.
It's like language has these inside jokes, and if you don't get it, you're missing out. But, okay, we can't talk about literally without talking about the elephant in the room, right? The debate. People who hate it when literally is used figuratively. Barron mentions these language purists who just see it as wrong, like it's ruining the English language.
Oh, absolutely. That resistance to change, it's everywhere, not just with language. People always think things were better in the past, that there was this golden age when language was pure. But honestly, language has always been changing. It has to. New ideas, new ways of thinking, it all has to be reflected in how we communicate.
So trying to hold on to these old rules, it's kind of pointless.
It's like trying to stop a river from flowing. Language is going to go where it needs to go. And that's where Barron's first law of English usage comes in, this idea that when grammar enthusiasts start complaining about a word or a phrase, it usually means it's already won. It's so common, so widely accepted, that it's basically become part of the language, whether they like it or not.
So by that logic, literally, being used figuratively, it's here to stay, no matter how much those language purists might disapprove.
Precisely. It's become so ingrained in how we speak and write, it's hard to imagine English without it. But here's the interesting part. What does it tell us about how language changes? If it's common usage that really defines a word's meaning, then who gets to decide what's correct?
That is a really good question, and it makes you wonder, what other words or phrases are out there that were once considered wrong, but now they're becoming acceptable because everyone's using them that way?
That's the fascinating thing about language. It's a reflection of us, always evolving, just like we do.
It's almost as if literally has gone rogue, taken on a life of its own, don't you think?
It really has, and that's precisely what makes language so captivating. It's a force of nature, constantly evolving and defying our attempts to contain it within rigid boundaries.
It's funny when you really think about it, literally being used figuratively is kind of brilliant. It's like this self-aware wink to the listener, adding an extra layer of emphasis and, let's be honest, a touch of humor.
It's a linguistic paradox that, instead of undermining the word's meaning, actually enhances it. It speaks to the playful, creative spirit of language itself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the wonderfully weird world of literally, I'm left with this thought, maybe we shouldn't be so quick to judge those who use it incorrectly. Maybe it's time to embrace the fluidity of language and appreciate the creativity it allows for.
After all, language is about so much more than just conveying information. It's about connecting with each other, expressing ourselves, and sometimes even challenging the very rules we've created.
Well said. And on that note, dear listener, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever noticed words or phrases that have taken on meanings beyond their literal definitions? What are some of your favorite linguistic quirks? Share your thoughts with us. Let's keep this conversation going and continue to explore the ever-evolving, endlessly fascinating world of language. Until next time, happy word nerding.